Chapter 15, Old Stories. Kino Amark. The wind was cold, and I clutched the blanket tightly towards me in an attempt to keep myself warm. Some wildering sounds were buzzing near my ears as though mosquitoes were flying about. I raised my hand and thumped it against my ear, and then, I was wide awake. I opened my eyes wider, and all that registered was blurry. It was already bright outside. Sunlight seeped through the cabin's large windows. The waves crashing to the shore filled my ears, and I bolted upright. Where was I? The memories started to flood in, and I could still remember Mother. She finally remembered who I was. When I wrote that I wished she would love me again, she did. But it was a reunion that was not supposed to be. Soldiers from out of nowhere came to pursue us. And beads of tears started falling on my lap. I brushed it away as I tried to remember where my mother could be. She wasn't dead. She must be out there in the world with the tree runners. She must still be running in Sinista. The gods forbid that the general's men had caught her. The tree runners promised that they would take care of her, heal her from the arrow wounds that had torn her body all over. I stood up in a rush, unmindful of the sudden throbbing on my left leg. I looked down, and there was a wooden plank supporting the back of my leg. I bent down, tore the rope that bound the plank to my leg, and when it was free, I stood up again and ran. But I had not gone very far when I heard a voice. It sounded familiar, as though I had heard it before. "Stop!" a deep voice said. I paused. I wanted to run away, but I felt I had to wait. I felt that whoever had told me to stop was someone I should obey. I turned around to see who it was. There was an old man a few paces away from me. His hair was all white, and it matched his flowy beard. He was wearing a long robe that was customary to an elder. There was also something familiar about him, something that was almost calling out to me, but I could not figure out what it was. Then he smiled. "My grandson," he said. "Huh?" I said, perplexed. "Are you calling me your grandson?" He nodded, his eyes looking at me with fondness. "You have your mother's chin and hair, too, but I'm afraid that's where all the similarities are," he said. "I am your grandfather. My name is..." I shook my head in disbelief. "That can't be. Mother never mentioned you to me before. There was no one in our lives. We only had each other and..." I laughed mirthlessly. "I don't want to meddle with how things are going in Canela. I am just a boy. I want my mother back. I want her beside me. So please, if you are already done introducing yourself, there are places I need to go to. I must rescue Mother," I said. I wasn't exactly sure where I got the courage to speak up like that. But it seemed like all the things that had been happening to me for the past moon turns had finally sunk in. I am a boy, one who used to have no power. One who only wanted to live peacefully with his mother. There was nothing more that I wanted but that. I used to think I could only be whole once the gods had so kindly given me any power, but that was not the case now. What was important was right there with me all along, my mother. I would renounce the special ability I have now just to have her with me again. The old man's eyes regarded me with pity. They softened, and I couldn't stand it. I had to leave. Then it occurred to me that this place was not Sinista. If it was not Sinista, then where was I? "What is this place?" I asked. The waves continued to crash against the shore, spraying all around us. The wind blew hard that day. "We are in Lakay Islands," the old man said. "It would be a long journey to go back to Canela. I must go and rescue my mother. I left her with the tree runners. She was dying from arrow wounds, but the tree runners took her away. I must go fetch her now," I said in a rush. I could not believe that I would be somewhere so far away the next time I woke up. Well, at least it was not the blade of an axe upon my neck that woke me. "Calm down, Kino," the old man said. "Sit down, and we'll talk." I obliged. He turned his back to me and walked back to the cottage. I breathed slower to calm myself. Surprisingly, even though I wanted to go far away from the man who claimed to be my grandfather, I could not get up to do that. He was already walking back towards me by then, holding 2 cups. He handed me one as he bent to sit beside me. I sniffed the cup and was thankful for the aroma. The cup was warm, and it brought me comfort. The coldness of my hands gradually diminished. "I am Northsam Mendel Amark," the man said. I glanced at him, watching his eyes, wondering whether he was joking. However, he stared straight back at me with a kind smile painted on his lips. As I looked deeper into his eyes, I saw some of my mother's likeness there, and I gave a start. "You have got to be kidding me," I gushed. "There's no way that you are my grandfather. Let alone the former Emperor Northsam Mendel Amark, because otherwise, that would make Mother Craddy royalty and that would, in turn, make me Craddy royalty and that would..." My eyes rounded at the realization. That would make the Emperor want to go after me. My mouth hung open when I finished. I was astonished at what this man revealed. How in the world could this happen? Wasn't he dead? Wasn't his death why Emperor McQuinn Stormare now sat on the throne? It did not add up. I stood up, leaving the cup of tea close to my feet until the old man motioned for me to sit beside him again. "It is a lot to take in." "I am certain of that," he said. He was watching me, but I didn't know how to react. "I don't want to be your grandson," I said softly. I was surprised that I said that, but I could not take back my words. He chuckled. "I understand your predicament. But my boy, we are blood relatives. You won't be able to run away from your destiny," he said, sipping his tea. "What do you mean, destiny? You say it like it's such a big thing," I said. "I don't want my destiny to be anything else aside from just being a citizen of Akea. Nothing more. I want my mother back, my friends back. I want to stay in Wawang village. I want to go and study under Professor Levin, and... I stopped because all the things that I was talking about seemed to be so long ago. When was it that I last attended school? That would make it before the Akeen Wine Festival, when Pyper, Mayo, and I practiced the presentation of my power. "I commiserate with you on everything that has happened," he said. His eyes were still fixed on me. "I had to come and get you because I need you to be ready for what will happen next." What will happen next? I don't think I want to dwell on that thought. I am still trying to remember what has happened and understand the events that transpired, because until now, nobody has bothered to explain to me why my mother had to be pursued by the Emperor, why I had to live without her, and why the Emperor wanted me dead, I said. Tears started rolling down my cheeks. The man who claimed to be my grandfather, if he really was, leaned over and gathered me in his arms. "It's all right, Kino. It's all right, son," he said as he put his arms around me. I couldn't control it anymore. I sobbed as I have never before, and all the while, wondered when these events would stop. Will there ever be a time that I would just be with my mother again? After a while, there were no other sounds I could hear aside from my occasional sniffing and the waves that had not ceased from crashing against the shore. I swallowed hard, then, breathed in and out, as I tried to clear my head. I am still a boy, someone who did not understand what was happening around him, but with this man beside me who claims to be family, hope began to glimmer faintly. "I think that it's time you stand up," he said, extending his hand, urging me to rise. I grabbed it and pulled at him as I moved to stand. "There," he said. "Isn't that better?" Nothing seemed to change, but I guess, I said. He chuckled again. "I am here to guide you. First off, with your power," he said. "My power," I repeated. "I don't know what it is." "I have a hunch," the man said. "Show me what you can do now." I tried to make myself invisible, but I couldn't. I tried to run fast, but I couldn't. At that moment, I did not know what power I had. Too many citizens that I probably bumped into on the way here, and as such, I could have unknowingly absorbed or copied any power within my reach. I shook my head. "That's the problem. I don't know what my power is," I said softly. "But what were you able to do before?" "Turn invisible, run really fast, remove bad ingredients from food, I enumerated. Grow vines. I was able to do that before too. It is just as I thought, the man said. Shuffling. Shuffling? I repeated in uncertainty. What do you mean? Shuffling is an old power. Many thought it to be long gone because nobody has registered that power in a long time. But you see, this usually happens when there were inter-clan marriages. The gods usually get confused about what power to give to the children of inter-clan marriages. In their confusion, they sometimes make the mistake of endowing shuffling. If there were no inter-clan marriages, what usually is bestowed to the child is a mild variation of a parent's power. Inter-clan? But, I don't even know who my father was, I said. The old man's eyes crinkled around the edges as though in deep thought. That is usually how shuffling is acquired, but it doesn't mean it is the only way, he said. Perhaps, there were other reasons. You see, shuffling is a sacred art. Once mastered, it can be the most powerful of powers. I'd like to think that is why very few Akeans have had shuffling as a power. He paused. I was listening to everything he said. I was thankful that for the first time, someone could guide me with my power. And for it to even have a name, shuffling. It sounded so cool. But, he continued, if it is not mastered, it would be as if you have no power because how can you use something you do not know you have? Exactly. I cried out. That was what I've been telling my friends who kept on urging me to try and use my power. I couldn't because I didn't know what my power was exactly. How was I supposed to harness it? And there was this time that I could copy someone else's power to freeze hearts. The next thing I knew, someone was lying on the ground, dead. I stopped and shuddered at my own story. I still remember when it happened. Mayo had called me a criminal, so I decided to run away from my friends. A wave of sadness engulfed me at the memory. Freeze hearts? The old man asked. It surprises me that the old powers were coming back in new blood. Does it mean someone could revive a frozen heart? He inquired. I tried to remember but I did not know what happened to the boy whose heart I froze. I don't know. I ran away after I accidentally froze someone's heart because I feared I had killed him. After that, I only used my power if I was sure the one I copied was invisibility. That is a fair judgment, to use your power only when you were certain, he said. Can you teach me how to properly use it? I asked, eager to know more about my power. I can teach you some aspects of your power, but not everything. What I know of shuffling was only limited to what I have learned from the scholars who taught me before, he said, trying to be as assuring as possible. I heaved a deep sigh, and my disappointment might have shown on my face because the man who claimed to be my grandfather placed his hand on my shoulder. I can guide you, but harnessing your power to its full potential, he paused, eyeing me, that would have to be you alone. Over the next few days, I noticed that the wound on my left leg was healing nicely, and I was thankful for that. I still couldn't control my power, though. If I knew the power of the person in front of me, I could copy that, but if I were clueless, the power buckled. Come on, think of the last time you became invisible, Elder Northsam urged. I breathed in and exhaled slowly. I raised my chin up and focused. I even closed my eyes to try to remember when it was that I became invisible. It was from a long time ago when I was still with Pyper and Mayo. Now what? I asked, opening one of my eyes. Then, try to touch that feeling. Try to recount how it felt that time. Try to grasp what is just hovering above you, the old man said. I closed my eyes again and tried to remember the last time I was invisible. I was in the middle of Sinista. I turned invisible to protect my mother. I tried to push the sadness that came with remembering my mother, and instead, I grasped what Elder Northsam said was just hovering above me. However, there was nothing there to reach out to. It was just a long expanse of darkness. I felt like I was floating. There was a spark of light that kept blinking above. If that's what I should touch, I had to reach for it. I tried to touch it, and... Ouch! I yelled as I found myself lying on the sand. Apparently, the effort had me off balance, and I fell. Elder Northsam extended a hand to me. "It's not easy," he said. "But keep focused, and you will get to it." "Why does controlling my power have to be so difficult?" I asked, frowning. "I told you, shuffling is an extraordinary power. It can take the highest form if mastered but could be as useless as not having power if left uncontrolled," the elder said. "That's why I'm helping you out. Because when we go out there to fight, you must be able to control your power." "But I don't want to fight," I grumbled. "Why does there have to be a fight? Who are we fighting exactly?" "An usurper," the former emperor said, his tone suddenly gone serious. "The emperor had been controlling you in the palm of his hands for a long time. It must be changed. But if I could just escape him, and once I find my mother, we'll settle somewhere where we can hide, then it doesn't matter what the emperor does anymore," I said. "As long as he couldn't get to us." "That is how you feel now," he said. "But you can't keep running away from the emperor. If his rule remains, his soldiers will be bound to find you, no matter where you hide. There will be no sense of security unless you submit yourself to his rule. And besides," he paused, "you are from my bloodline, which means that it must be ingrained in your core that service to the Akene people is the greatest thing of all." "Service?" I wondered, "how will I ever serve?" "I don't, is there, can I stuttered. The elder looked at me kindly. "Maybe it is time we put aside the physical training we've been doing and focus instead on the spirit. For the spirit to grow, you must understand your history," he said. There seemed to be no way out of it, so I listened to Elder Northsam. We were out in the open, about 100 yards away from the cottage, with the shoreline to our front. The waves provided the calm that I very much needed. Up until now, I have not believed this man who claims to be my family. My grandfather, in fact. "May I ask you a question?" I said. The old man nodded. I blurted out, "Why does the emperor want me dead?" "Before I answer that, can you tell me exactly what happened on the day the emperor ordered your execution?" he said. I shivered and couldn't control my emotions. It seemed a long time ago, and a lot had happened in between. Up until now, no one has asked me about that fateful day, save for Mayo and Pyper. I didn't want to recount it, but it was necessary. I always wanted to have power, but I never had one. All these past years that I was in school, everybody would gang up on me and call me names because no power ever manifested in me. And then one day, I met this girl. She was sort of a ghost, but she actually wasn't. Well, at least after I befriended her and learned all about her. She could turn herself invisible. I glanced at the elder, who nodded at me to continue. It turned out she wasn't a ghost at all. The stories that went around about the ghost town weren't true. The ghosts were actually Nivens in Nivedon. And since Pyper had become my friend and she had, at some point, witnessed how I was being bullied for having no power, she and another boy, Mayo, devised a plan on how I could register a power in the Akene books. Under the guise that I had Distantekis, I presented to the emperor. I made a wooden box fly around me, although what was really happening was that Pyper was holding and throwing it up and catching it again while she was invisible. Everybody was stunned by my performance. I thought they were happy about it. I smiled at the memory. For that brief moment, I felt like I was happy too. That I belonged in Akea. I stared at the old man, trying to make him understand my confusion. And then, after the presentation was over, the emperor asked me who my mother was. Northsam's eyebrows rose as though he had heard my story for the first time. Since it happened more than a moon turn ago, I thought everyone already knew about it. I told him it was Emperor Amark. Then after that, the sky darkened, I paused and breathed deeply. Do you know how sometimes in Akea the weather can change so easily? I thought that was just it. But then the emperor opened his eyes and said, "Kill him." I paused again. Somehow, my voice broke. I didn't know what to do. I just thought that maybe, he saw through the farce that the presentation of my citizenship was just a sham. It was good that Pyper reached out to me and extended her power. We were invisible then, running away from the soldiers. That's how it all happened. It never crossed my mind that this would happen. There were many casualties from what I heard, because the Emperor wanted me dead. And since then, I paused, my voice breaking. I wasn't sure if it was because I was afraid or if I was uncertain. Everywhere I went, it seemed like soldiers would magically appear and go after me and whoever I was with. The elder's brows grew knitted, and it took quite a while before he spoke. Nivens, eh? He said. The Emperor destroyed the Nivens to protect himself. Protect himself? But how? I inquired. The old man turned to look at me. There was a prophecy that out of the Niven blood, Akea will rise again. If the Emperor believes the prophecy, which I think he does, then he would do all he can to prevent that from happening. I still did not understand what he was saying and how it could have involved me. But that's Niven blood. What does it have to do with me? He shook his head, eyes scrutinizing me. There seems to be a mystery here, one that only your mother could give answers to. What do you mean? I prodded. Ah, it is from a long time ago, he whispered. He was looking at the waves as they gently crashed upon the shore. I stared at the waves, too, and found myself calming. It is surreal how the events turned out, especially since. Elder Northsam paused. I waited for him to finish his sentence, but no other words came out of his mouth as he continued staring at the ocean. I itched to know what he was thinking. What? I asked, the impatience gnawing at me. You did not finish what you were saying. A look of concern passed over the old man's face. He must have been thinking about whether to tell me or not. You told me I am your grandson. Prove it to me now. Tell me everything because I still don't believe you. I said, mildly irritated. I mean, here I was sitting beside him, and days ago, he dropped the bomb that he was the former emperor whom the gods only knew was believed to be dead long ago. What right does he have to tell me that I was his grandson? He was only making my already confused brain more, well, confused. It is surreal how the events turned out, especially since your mother has the power that would have been envied by all if they had known, he said. I stared at the old man, confused. She writes. That's her power, I said. There's more to it than that. If it were just writing, there's not much power there, but the thing is, your mother's power is different, the former emperor said. Up until now, I have not shared it with anyone because of the implications that it might bring. It is so powerful that even I was afraid of it, he said, chuckling. What is it? I asked again, eager to know more than ever. I always knew it had something to do with writing, but I never knew its extent. My friends and I wanted to steal the registry of citizens so that we could search what mother's power was. You will not find it there because she is royalty, he replied. Royalty don't declare their powers to anyone. They may do so, but they are never obliged. It is believed that royalty can serve and protect Akea better if the potential enemies, rebels if you will, did not know from which angle they must attack to weaken any royalty's power. Mayo Calo is right. I said in astonishment. He said that I must be Craddy royalty, that's why the Emperor was after me. A lot could have happened that I didn't know of. You know, being dead has its drawbacks, the elder jested, his eyes crinkling on the edges. Your mother was wed to Emperor McQuinn Storm Aaron. No. I yelled. No. That just can't be. You're not saying that he is my father? This was horrible. This was way beyond what my little mind could comprehend. The Emperor, a husband to my mother? That would undoubtedly mean I was his son. You have to listen. I know that it is a lot to take in, and nobody aside from myself probably remembers you, or my daughter, or the Emperor, for whatever relationship it was that binds the three of you, he paused. I have no knowledge of how that happened, why I'm the only one who remembers. Unless, he paused again. Unless it had something to do with your mother's power. I just stared at him in disbelief, at this man who claimed to be my grandfather, and wished that everything that came out of his mouth were all lies. And then he told me the story of how when my mother, the former Princess Lamare Ariston Amark, came of age, she was wed to McQuinn Storm Aaron. Shortly after, Elder Northsam went missing. Everyone had concluded that the former emperor must have died. Thus, a proclamation was later announced all over Akea. However, instead of having Lamare Amark as the empress, McQuinn Storm Aaron, the consort, was proclaimed as the new emperor instead. I learned that my daughter was carrying a baby in her womb. I was excited for her, and even though I wanted to be with her, I controlled myself and did not return. I waited until she was about to give birth so that I could see her and her baby, he said, his voice softening as though he wanted to apologize for not being there when I was born. I travel day and night, so I can be with you as soon as she gives birth. While traveling, I would take breaks and spend time inside local inns to learn about what had been happening in Akea. Lo and behold, I was surprised to find that there was no more princess in Kanelan to speak of. I thought I was mistaken, for how can my daughter's existence be so suddenly wiped off in Akea? How can she be a princess and then the next second be a royal scribe, for God's sakes? It was appalling. However, the stories were all the same. Every bar that I visited in every town I traversed spoke of no princess and no baby that had been born and supposedly would have been the heir to the throne. How could that happen? The story you told me earlier, where the emperor ordered your death after he learned who your mother was, led me to believe that he remembers you and Lamare. But save from me, the emperor, and your mother, perhaps, nobody else remembered you. When asked, nobody could give me an answer about the princess and her baby. It was as though you and your mother led totally different lives. But how no one ever remembered you remain a mystery to me, he paused. Unless it is your mother's doing. And since the emperor also remembers you, it could have been something that they agreed upon. What do you mean? But if whatever it was worked on everybody else, how come it didn't work on you? I asked, confused. Your mother's power does not work on me, he said briefly, as though that already explained everything. Hold on. I'm confused. You never told me what mother's power was. Perhaps we should begin with that and then tell me how it never worked on you, I said a little too demandingly. Your mother writes about things, he said, pausing briefly before continuing, and wills for them to happen. At that moment, my mouth fell open. How could that be? If that were true, Mother would have perhaps written for us to live somewhere safe where not even the emperor could touch us. And yet, for all her power, she could not. Which could only mean that maybe it wasn't true? The shock of such a revelation prompted me to stand up and prepare to leave. The elder grabbed me by the arm and pulled me to sit down. Your mother's power is eccentric. It is, he said, pausing, his eyes narrowing as though he was trying to recall something. It was not heard of before. At least I knew of no one who had that power. Can you imagine what anyone with that power could have done? A lot of things. I wanted to belt out. Like she could have given me any power. Like, she could have ended my misery for not having any special ability. Like she could have made us run away from the emperor. I was shaking and felt flushed all over, but I couldn't figure out why. Was I angry at my mother? If she had that power, how come she didn't give me any? Anyone could have owned the world, the elder said, if they had her power. And so, I was grateful that such power never manifested in another Akeen. Shaking his head, he murmured, it should have never happened. It was only because I was young and adventurous. I stared at the old man, wanting to ask him. What? I said. His face became serious, as though he had not meant for me to hear what he had just uttered. Growing up, I had to ensure that your mother developed a kind heart. And mind you, she did. She grew up to be compassionate, but she was logical too. I had asked her to think once, twice, thrice before she used her power. How I discovered her power was quite extraordinary. She was about 5 moon turns then, and her tutor had been teaching her how to write. One day, Professor Daniel, may the gods bless that man, came rushing to my chambers to report that my daughter had been burning paper in his classroom. His face was ashen. I thought the old scholar would collapse and die due to immense shock. I could understand his concern because any power that could lead to arson was to be strictly monitored by the palace, and if your mother's ability were like that, it would be horrible not only to her but also to me. That would mean I would have to declare her power and register it in the Akeen books. But when I reached the classroom, Your mother was beaming as she was straddling the whitest pony I had ever seen. Your mother loved to ride. She was making such a ruckus inside the classroom. I had to dismiss Professor Daniel then. He left without raising any questions. That's when I learned that your mother's power wasn't akin to that of an arsonist. She raised a hand to me, giggled, and said, "Look, Papa. I can write on air." And she did. Whatever she wrote dissolved into flames, and it was mesmerizing to watch. "Wait a minute," I said. My heart was beating fast. "When she writes, it burns?" He nodded. That seals whatever she had written to come true. As soon as the words burned into ashes, it would happen almost immediately. I grew quiet. I wanted to tell the elder that something similar happened to me recently. While I was writing my thoughts the way Regan told me to, I wrote that my mother would love me again. For her to remember me again. And she did. And the words burned to ashes. Shortly after that, my mother stood right in front of me, telling me that she was Lamare Ariston Amark. I brushed a tear that escaped the corner of my eye. I didn't know about it, but by God, if I had copied her power at some point, would that mean that once I mastered shuffling, I could use her power too? Your mother wrote things like she wished she had the whitest, gentlest pony, he continued, and I was thankful that he didn't notice how fazed I had been with his story. And then I made her write again, and I witnessed your mother's majestic power. I remember thinking what a great power that was. I wanted to have that kind of power so badly. However, just imagine the kind of havoc it could cause if the power was given to the wrong person. You could start a war by literally just flicking your pen. Or end someone's life. Or gain even more power than what you already have or deserve. It was while pondering those mortal thoughts that I realized that my daughter was not exactly under my control. I had sleepless nights wondering what would happen if one day, on a whim, my daughter wrote something that could cause me to lose my power. Or any other that could have an impact on me. Children grow. And when they do, they usually do not share the same opinion with their parents. I guess that terrified me. The following day, I had made up my mind. I would make myself immune to my daughter's power. "What did you do?" I asked, excited to know but trying not to be too obvious about it. "It was simple," he said, smiling. "I went to my daughter's room, sat her on my knee, and told her to write 'My power will never work on father.'" "Just like that?" I said, surprised it was not as complicated as I had expected. "Just like that," he said. Of course, I had watched as my daughter's words burned, marking whatever she wrote as a fact. It wouldn't have worked on me if ever my daughter had used her power on me since then. She had been young, and I doubt if she would remember having written what I asked her to. "Wow! And here I am with no power at all," I said. "You have power now," the old man corrected me. "But what I don't understand is why it only manifested recently. I believe that there are things that only your mother could give answers to. So whatever question you still have, save it for when we're all together." I nodded in understanding. "Nobody remembers my mother and me. Nobody knows you're alive. The Emperor wants me dead. He used to be my mother's husband," I said slowly as I attempted to piece everything together. "This means that he could be afraid I would go against him. That's why he wanted me dead." The elder nodded slowly. His eyes had dimmed. The brightness in them when he talked about his daughter had faded. "I'm afraid so," he said. "But we will do something about that. It is time to meet Micromania. Her prophecy could shed some more light." "All right," I said. If ever I had been afraid earlier, it was replaced with gladness as it dawned on me that I indeed have a family. The man standing before me, there's no doubt about it now, was Northsam Mendel Amark. He was the former emperor, and my grandfather. And even though I didn't want to be cratty royalty, I am. But the source of my happiness was in knowing that I belonged. In this crazy world where everyone had been plotting to kill me or wanting to give me to the emperor, there was this kind man. I brushed my eyes again as tears streaked my cheeks. I gulped to control the emotions that I was sure my voice carried. "All right," I murmured. "All right, Grandpa," I said, choking. His eyes shadowed, and he grabbed me in a tight embrace. For the first time in such a long, long time, I didn't dream of anything horrible that night.